What are the dialogue secrets that expert writers use to make their dialogue sharper, deeper, and more memorable? Do they struggle with making their characters sound natural and different from each other? Yes, but of course, the longer someone writes, the easier it becomes. So they have their natural talent plus their experience to help them create great dialogue. But even expert writers don't rely on talent alone. They have developed these strategies over time to make their dialogue crackle on the page, and that's what I'm going to share with you today.
You have a story to tell, but you don't know where to start. Let me show you how to free your story. I teach you how to write and how to dig deep in your soul to release your story and make a difference in the world.
Welcome to the Julia Amante channel. If we're just meeting, I am Julia Amante. I'm a women's fiction author. I'm also a writing teacher, and I'm here to help you with your stories. So let's talk about the very first thing that expert writers do when it comes to their dialogue, and that is that they cut. Because we are writers, we love to write. So what tends to happen is that we overwrite. The dialogue goes on forever. We have these greetings like, hey, hello, how are you today? I'm fine, thanks, right? We want to cut all of that. Long monologues, we don't want our characters speaking forever. We want them to take breaks. We want to see movement. We want them to be interrupted. We don't want them to go on for a page or 2 pages telling us their life story, right? We want them to sound more natural. We want the dialogue to reveal character. We want it to move the story forward, and we want it to increase tension. So the first thing that you want to look at is cutting. Where can you cut and make your dialogue more punchy? So here's the first half. Look at the first line and the last line of your dialogue and see if you can cut that. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. Usually when you can, it definitely makes your dialogue better because the real conversation happens in the middle. We usually lead up to what we want to say, and then we say more than we need to say at the end. Okay, tip number 2 is looking for subtext or adding subtext. Best dialogue isn't usually what's being said, but what is implied or what's not being said. As a women's fiction and romance author, I use subtext a lot, and that is because in relationships we don't typically say exactly what we mean. Relationships are complicated, and by avoiding certain topics or by saying something in a not a direct way, we maintain our relationships, right? So in romance novels, for example, the characters will often deflect what they really want to say, or they will, and it builds tension, right? When they're doing this, we know as the reader, they really want to say this, or they really want to admit to something that they don't. They don't convey their desire, for example. They wait and they hold back. So there's a lot of pausing, there's a lot of avoidance. And we do this in real life, so you want your characters to do this in your stories as well. Now, a lot of readers enjoy the Colleen Hoover novels. So a good example from Layla, this isn't a romantic thing, but there is, in Layla, there's one character is Gabriel Leeds, and he has the female character with her mouth taped and up above in a different room. And the detective comes to question him. Now, because she's still upstairs and she just has her mouth covered, she's making noises, right? She's has these muffled sounds. Gabriel doesn't know if the detective can hear that, but he can hear it, and he knows this is making him nervous, right? So the dialogue between him and the detective sounds pretty straightforward. The detective's just questioning him, but he's doing all these other things. He's flinching. There's some silence. There's some like unspoken words because he can't tell the detective the truth, but he kind of feels guilty. There's some guilt there. There's some fear, of course. So all this is the subtext below the conversation. So we as the readers can feel that, but what we're actually reading is just a normal question and answer between the character and the detective, right? So between Gabriel and the detective, it's just the normal questioning. But the subtext below is, I'm scared, I'm afraid, I feel guilty, I feel bad, all these things, right? So here's the hack for the second one is you want to write a scene where you add the subtext in. The character is actually saying something different from what he feels or different from what he means. And so you want to let the actions actually speak, not what he's saying. Okay, the third thing that you can do to test your dialogue is to read it out loud or to act it out. Now, I'm not much for acting things out. I'm not an actress, so, but I do read it out loud. So I read it to make sure that it flows well. The characters are sounding like themselves. They're not sounding like me. They're not sounding like each other. Make sure that as you're reading it, you're not stumbling over your words, because if you are, then that means your reader is too. So a hack for this third point is that you can, as you're reading out loud, try to read in the voices of those characters. So yeah, it feels like you're acting it out, right? But you're just reading in the voices of those different characters. Now, if as you're reading it, they sound the same, like it sounds like the same character speaking, then you know you have a problem. You're not distinguishing these characters enough. So read it, maybe record it and listen back and see how you feel. 'Cause sometimes as you're speaking, you don't really hear it, but if you record it and listen back to it, you will hear that. You'll hear the difference, or you won't hear a difference, and then you know you have a problem. Okay, the fourth tip is to add interruptions or pauses. It makes it more realistic, and characters a lot of times interrupt each other. Real people interrupt each other. So although we are not trying to imitate real speech exactly, because it tends to be boring, we do want to add some realism to it. And in real life, we do tend to interrupt each other, speak over each other, things like that. So a good example from Linda Howard's Veil of Night. It's right here. It says, I have to admit something I don't like saying, the senator said heavily. Eric waited, studying every flicker of expression the senator gave. I wasn't at work, he admitted, keeping his voice low. Bingo, he'd been right. What kind of fucking fool would cheat on a woman like Faye or Dennison? Eric wondered. Oh, right. A fucking fool. That's the kind. He didn't say what he was thinking. He just said, we'll need her name, address, and phone number. The senator nodded. I left work early so I could be with her. She was able to get some free time from her job, so we took the opportunity to be together. Her name, Eric prodded. So if you'll notice, Eric doesn't jump right in when the senator says he wants to confess something. He waits and there's some silence there, and he lets the senator continue. Then when Eric asks for the girlfriend's name, the senator actually changes. He doesn't respond to that at all. He says something completely different. So what is the character doing? He's avoiding the question, right? And then Eric just continues with, give me her name. So this is really good. So the interaction between the two sounds realistic. Each character in this scene has a different goal. Each character sounds different. They sound like themselves. They're kind of stumbling over themselves, not finishing sentences. So sounds very good. There's a lot of interruptions, there's a lot of pauses, and that's what you want. So the hack for this fourth point is to go through some of your scenes and add some interruptions. They can be anything like small physical, movements. They can be pauses. They can be interruptions of dialogue. But you want to do this because this grounds the reader in the emotion. It creates some beats between the dialogue that you really need in order to pace your story well. Okay, my fifth suggestion is to play with power. So there's always a power dynamic between characters. Somebody's always more powerful than the other one. Somebody has more leverage than another person. And one of the things that expert writers do is that they know when to shift the power. So sometimes the power does shift within the dialogue while two people are speaking. Starts with one person being more powerful than the second, but as the dialogue continues, you can tell that the power is shifting within the scene. You can do that in 4 different ways. One is that you can control who's controlling the conversation. So maybe one person at the beginning is controlling, asking all the questions, doing all the talking, but as the dialogue continues, you can see that the power is shifting, that the other person is taking control. Another way that you can change the power is that one person knows something that the second person doesn't know. So person A is controlling the conversation. They think that they are in control. Then person B tosses in something that person A didn't know. And that changes the power dynamics. Okay, a third way is through those interruptions and the silences, because sometimes the person who is quiet really is controlling the conversation more. So person A is doing all the talking, they're doing the accusations, whatever, but person B starts to control the conversation by being quiet or by avoiding certain topics. So well-played silence or dismissive response really is good sometimes for controlling the conversation and the dialogue. And the fourth way is a sudden realization or insight that one of the characters has. So maybe character A is controlling the conversation. They're talking, they're the ones in power, but they say something during that conversation that makes character B realize, oh, wait a minute, maybe I do have the upper hand here. And then the power shifts and they take control of the conversation. It's kind of fun to play with this power dynamics during dialogue because it's really cool. It can take a story in a different direction. If you've read The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, he has a scene. It's the Plaza Hotel scene. I don't know if you've read it, but Tom Buchanan and Jay Gatsby confront each other over Daisy. And Gatsby believes that he's won her love, right? And he plans to take her away. But Tom inserts his dominance, okay, by talking about Gatsby's past. So Tom says, I suppose the latest thing is to sit back and let Mr. Nobody from nowhere make love to your wife. Because of this line, the power shifts because Gatsby realizes that Tom knows who he is, right? He knows his past. You can do this in your own novel by tracking the emotional stakes. So when the power shifts, the emotional stakes will change. So your hack for this point is to try this. Try writing a scene where the power shifts during the dialogue. So between the two characters, and see how that changes the story. See if it adds a plot, it changes the plot point, or if it moves your story in a different direction. My sixth suggestion is to mix dialogue with internal dialogue. So dialogue by itself doesn't do it all. It's what is going on within the character's head. So letting the reader know what the character is thinking can be really powerful. And we do this in real life all the time, right? We talk to ourselves. We're telling ourselves things. So an example of this could be the hero says, I didn't mean it like that. And the heroine says, he always says that every time, and somehow it still hurts. I know, she lied. Right? So she's saying one thing, but she's thinking something different. She's having that internal dialogue. And that internal dialogue shows us really a little bit more about the character, her reluctance to maybe get in an argument. It increases the tension a little bit because what she doesn't say could come back later in the novel. She might realize, hey, he's always saying hurtful things. And this might sort of foreshadow that she's going to change at some point. She's actually going to confront him, but at this point she's not. So there's a lot more that sometimes is being said with that internal dialogue than with the external dialogue. Your hack for this point is to go and to one of your scenes and add some internal dialogue. What is this character really thinking? And is it different from what they're saying? Sometimes it can be the same. So sometimes they're saying, no, I don't want to go out to dinner, but internally they're saying, oh, it really would be good though. I haven't been out in a long time. And then their dialogue changes and they say, well, okay, sure, let's go, right? So sometimes their internal dialogue and their external dialogue will match, but a lot of times it doesn't, and that makes it really cool. Point number 7 is to focus on personality. So don't try to have perfect dialogue, have dialogue that matches the character's personality. And this is specifically true with grammar. So a lot of times we don't really want to write grammatically incorrect sentences. It's been trained out of us. We want to write perfect dialogue. We want them to speak in perfect sentences. And they don't, right? So we don't speak in perfect sentences. We don't always use the correct grammar. So we don't have to have our characters do that. There may be one character that does, but not all of them. They all need to sound like themselves. They all need to speak the way they do. They could use slang. They could use incomplete sentences. They could say things wrong. So expert writers know this. Their characters are unique and they all sound different because they don't focus on writing perfect sentences and perfect grammar and having, everything be perfect. What they're focusing on is that character's personality, who they are, what their background is, the emotions that they're having, any quirks that they might have. And that's what they are adding into the dialogue. So you always need to be thinking about the character's worldview. You need to think about what they value. You need to think about their religious, maybe if that's included, their beliefs, their regional dialects, their emotional states. So even someone who typically speaks perfectly and enunciates their sentences well, and they have great grammar, sometimes if they're upset or angry or hurt, they may change. They may revert to a different dialect. They may revert to or they may just not speak right because they're so upset. Something else that you want to do is give them some verbal tics that helps to distinguish the character. And not all the time, like it doesn't have to be. So there may be a character that says, you know what I mean, right? But they don't have to do that every single time because it can get annoying. But if you do it a few times, we start to know, like, okay, this is the way that character speaks. This is a verbal tic that they have. Some characters might speak in cliches because a lot of people really do. And then if they do that, you might want to do it, right? You might want to add those cliches throughout, and then we know that this is the way that that character speaks. I'm going to pause here a moment just to share that I am starting a 12-month writing program that you can join. We'll start at the very beginning, and by the end of the 12 months, you will have your novel written. If you'd like to join, there's a link below. You can check it out and see what you think. I'd love to spend an entire year with you as you write, edit, and get your story ready to publish. I hope that these 7 points have helped you and that you see how expert writers use these. So just again to review, the first one is cut ruthlessly. The second one is use subtext over speech. The third is to read it out loud to yourself or act it out. The fourth, use interruptions, pauses, or beats. The fifth is to play with power, do the power shift within the dialogue. The sixth is to mix your internal and your external dialogue within a scene. And the seventh is to focus on personality rather than writing perfect dialogue or writing perfect speech. The writing unforgettable dialogue isn't about being brilliant and writing everything perfect. It's really about using dialogue as a tool for us to get to know your characters, for us to see your plot evolve, and to create tension in the novel. So expert writers are not different than you and me. What they're doing different is that they're focusing on these techniques, but they're using these hacks to make dialogue look easy and sound seamless. So try them and see if your dialogue improves. I'm going to include a dialogue checklist below, so go ahead and download that. It'll help you. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like and the share button and subscribe to the channel so you can come back next week.